Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Risk, where our mission is to engage, inspire, and empower the global community of risk practitioners. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and today I'm super excited to welcome my guest, Adam Isaacs Ray, from the other side of the pond in Scotland. Adam and I have talked a couple of times, and what has really struck me about Adam is, how cool and conversational he is about such complicated topics as risk management or QMSR, that we're going to focus on QMSR today. So Adam, with that, I'm so happy to welcome you today. How are you?
I'm very good, Naveen. I'm very good. I've been fighting a bit of an illness this week, but we're at the end of it now. So I'm glad that this was here to be able to aim towards.
Yes. Nice. Yeah, I'm glad you're feeling much better. So, Adam, you are the managing director of quality and regulatory of your own consulting firm, but your firm is named the Other Consultants and the Other Auditors. Very curious to know if there's a backstory behind that. Very interesting name.
Yes, there is. Like anything, there's often context. So the business, the Other Consultants, has been going since 2018. That the name very much came from a film that was released. I think this film it was like 2012. It's one of my favourite films with Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell and The Rock as well, isn't it? And it's called The Other Guys. And The Other Guys kind of just represented something a little bit in that film, maybe not the type of other I was looking for, but they represented something a bit different from the norm.
Yeah.
It was slightly different, their own style, and that's kind of what I tried to have with my consultancy business. I wanted to keep it very small and very bespoke, very just me, myself, so I could work with my clients directly. So that, and I always think it looks cool on invoices when you see the Other Consultants, and people always say, "Who's done that?" And then you say the Other Consultants, and they just say, "Who?"
Yes. Oh, I love it. I think it sparks conversations. That's how I know you. That you bring a certain level of fun and excitement to these very intense conversations that we generally have about risk management or regulatory compliance and what these requirements are. So, Adam, let's jump into our main topic today. And guys, as you are joining today, I want to welcome you and remind you that this is a conversation, so you're a part of it. Make sure that you are sharing your comments and questions in the chat with me, and I'll bring them up here as much as I can. So, Adam, we're going to talk about QMSR, which is almost here. Can't believe it's October. It's almost here. And you have been very deeply involved with QMSR, and everybody is talking about it in our world, right? But I think you are talking about it in a slightly different way. Tell us what your approach is to QMSR preparation.
Yeah. So thanks, Naveen. So I think, like you said, I also cannot believe it's October. I remember it feels like the other day when this was released in 2024. It's just wild. So the way I think now that I am looking at QMSR is, I think the time now has really passed for telling people we need to have gap assessments and we need to get ready for this. I think the time for that is kind of almost gone. I still think if anyone hasn't done that, I will always recommend that. I think now what feels pertinent for me working with manufacturers dealing with this change is really considering all of the changes that QMSR brings, but I am now becoming very focused on what QMSR is not changing. That may lead to difficulties for manufacturers down the road, both for those located in country, so in the US, or those that are foreign manufacturers that may have ISO 13485 certificates existing under certification bodies. A very complex scenario could be a class 1 device that's registered in the US but is also registered in the UK, for example, that has a 13485 certificate from a certification body. These are very nuanced circumstances that are going to be coming up. So these are the areas where I believe now is kind of really start to think about what's not changed and what has not changed that could potentially sting manufacturers as well.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. That's a fascinating way to look at it. In some ways, I think I understand what you're saying is that the fundamental focus on quality from FDA is not going to change, because I know FDA came out with this case for quality many, many years ago. They've encouraged manufacturers to adopt that quality mindset. So that's not going to change. And 13485 is the foundation of quality management system. Say a little bit more about where you think things are not going to change, more specifically in the context of regulation.
So I think the absolute main one that I think it's something I've not seen people speaking a lot about is really, and they may not speak about it because it's very obvious, but it's around the design control system. The need for DHF is changing. It's now becoming design and development file under ISO 13485, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the elements related to, say, registering your 510K, controlling changes to your 510K, for example, and again, both manufacturers in and out of the US, these requirements have not really changed, although some of the design control principles are changing, and it's although they're remaining relatively the same. But this is an area where I can foresee manufacturers that have a device, similar device or the same device that's on the market elsewhere and in the US, all going under one system, where I can see change control becoming very complicated for that. Because these fundamental requirements are not changing for when they must notify FDA. For example, verification and validation, the FDA have got that excellent guidance document that was released in 2017, 2018, particularly on if there's anything that comes out of a verification or validation for something you've substantiated as not a change, then it must be considered if it changes anything, if you fail a verification that's previously passed or a validation that's previously passed. This is one area that I can really foresee causing a lot of complexity and potentially catching manufacturers out.
That's interesting. And I'm glad that you bring up design controls because, this has been going on for a very long time. And as far as risk management is concerned, there is only one connection with design controls in the current QSR, which is in G. And I've always viewed this situation as limiting the FDA's ability to actually go a little bit deeper into the problems that we see in our system today, that risk management is not really properly integrated and connected with different quality processes, but they are limited in their ability to cite these findings because current QSR is not that broad on, or not that inclusive on risk. But if you look at 13485, there's a very strong connection between risk management and design inputs, is it not? So, I mean, how do you feel about how that approach might change? Can you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. So the nature of the way in which the FDA will be able to raise deficiencies and findings against manufacturers during QMS inspections will really change. And of course, the scope of that assessment in terms of how broad they can go, like you said, will change. Also, one of the main things that will not change is the amount of time that FDA can spend on site.
Yes.
They are all of a sudden not going to become a certification body where they are there for half a day or one day. They can choose to camp up for as long as they want, and when they're doing the bigger standard, it's way much.
You'll have to keep ordering lunch for them every time. Yeah. So that's a critical point, right? Because we can't really rely on the shortage of time during an audit with the FDA. FDA will take their own time. And one thing about FDA that I know is they will do a lot of pre-work. They will look at your data, look at your adverse events frequencies, and come up with their own hypotheses to probe where your risk management might be weak. So I want to touch upon this a little bit more, Adam, because after all, this is Let's Talk Risks. Under 13485, we know that there are many connecting points between the quality management system and the risk management system. And one particular area that I think people have been struggling is the post-market phase, the feedback, the so-called feedback loop in 13485. Compare that to complaints handling in QSR, which is just minimum basic requirements for vigilance. How do you see that playing out under QMSR?
So yes, 13485 has always had that kind of implicit risk-based system within it. So the requirement for their procedures must be have minimum requirements in there around obviously receiving that information, evaluating it if it constitutes a complaint. Within the complaint handling element of 13485, there's no mention of risk, which is interesting. I think that's really interesting. But the nature of it is implicit in the other kind of what you would say maybe the subclauses of, say, control of non-conforming product or corrective action, essentially. These, and then that main point of what I'd say in complaint handling is part F, and determining the need to initiate corrections or corrective actions would be that main bit. These are going to be the elements where I think is going to cause quite a lot of grey at first. The one thing we know that is maybe not going to change that much is the name of QSIT. It might still be called the same thing, although the methodology will change.
Yeah.
It seems from the initial information that's put out by FDA, but we've not seen any follow-up on that. On what that's going to look like. Personally, I don't think a lot of the FDA inspectors that I've been inspected by, I do not think their training will be much more than a paperwork exercise, because a lot of them have been very competent auditors, in terms of over and above the QSIT methodology. So I will expect the FDA to look at this from a perspective of looking at your complaints, because every FDA inspector always says, give me a list of your complaints. And they say, I want a list of all your complaints since your last inspection, and then they now will be able to demand more of a premise for filtering those complaints on risk, as opposed to trying to figure it out themselves. Whereas before, the FDA would request a big list of complaints, they'd want to look at them, and they would maybe inspect them themselves. Whereas now they can really start to ask that question of, okay, show me your highest risk complaints. And that's really going to be an area where you will kind of see a lot of manufacturing. Most of my life has been with ISO 13485 and QSR, so they always have a risk-based approach within the QMS, and I'm quite a lot of the time shocked when I don't see it, which is because I'm like spoiled. But I think that will be a major basis. It will drive a lot more focus in their audits. They will be able to say, show me your high-risk complaints and let me understand the basis of you determining that risk.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that, a lot of manufacturers who might be very used to dealing with notified bodies and FDA separately, they might think that they have a pretty comprehensive system. But when it comes to FDA, I think the how piece would become very critical. So guys, I hope you're enjoying this conversation. I want to welcome all of you. If you're just joining, my guest today is Adam Isaacs Ray. And I want you to know that you are part of this conversation. So please feel free to share your comments and thoughts in chat. What are you most concerned about QMSR? How it might change the way you do things in your company? What might be the biggest challenge for you? How might you plan interactions with FDA or notified bodies? Share all that. This is not a Q&A. This is not a webinar. This is not a lecture. This is a conversation, and we want to hear from you. So please don't hold back and share your comments. Adam, let's continue our conversation. So, FDA, of course, will have a lot more sort of ability to probe deeper. And I think they're going to ask the question, not only show me your complaints, not only what is your highest risk category, but what are you doing about it, right? What are you doing about it? And in that regard, we have to talk about CAPA, right? And one of the things I noticed is that in 13485, it's no longer CAPA, it's CA and PA. It's separated. How do you think that might play out in practice?
I think it will. First of all, I'm really happy about that.
Tell us why. So, why are you so happy about it?
For years, I was initially brought into industry under pure EU UK regulatory kind of framework, pure 13485. And the phrase CAPA does not exist in any of these terminologies. It just does not exist, and for years, it kind of took me a while to just get my head around this. And then, I think to have that consistency across the jurisdictions will really help people, because one thing that we see a lot of the time is really people confusing the definitions between corrections, corrective actions, preventive actions. I'm not going to labour the point on that too much, but I think everyone working to a standardised set of requirements that defines what must be in a CAPA procedure or corrective action procedure, dealing with an approach to a holistic approach to preventive action as well that's guided by the standard will be, can only benefit manufacturers. But I think in the other side of that as well, I think, the definition of CAPA versus, say, corrective action and preventive action, from what my experience, Naveen, is the same across the jurisdictions. CAPAs are generally used in all of my experience and a good experience. CAPAs are the things used to treat the biggest issues that the business is facing and manage those issues. And I think that is where I think the FDA kind of moving into this 13485 terminology will help that kind of come more into the UK and the EU space slightly more. And because in the EU, we look at it as corrective action, which could be applied on something that's very low risk, because it's still corrective action. It's the corrective action is it's the basis of fixing something to prevent recurrence. We look at it like that, whereas the FDA, there's this implied high risk element for CAPAs. that I think has always been there. And that's, again, for me, something that I don't think will change in that sense. I think FDA have always inspected CAPAs in a way of which I have inspected them. Give me a list of CAPAs, let me see them, and really, really go deep in the root cause analysis and the structured problem solving. But I think there's going to be, if the other, not the kind of foreign manufacturers are now going to be more exposed to that, they should not be expecting the same treatment as a certification body auditor or a notified body auditor, because the FDA will still keep that same approach to assessing CAPAs, I believe.
Yeah. So I think it's a good point, because it doesn't seem to me that the expectation will change. What might change is their ability to now cite you more explicitly. Yep. I mean, CAPA remains the most problematic area of the quality management system. If you look at warning letters, CAPA is all over the place. And if you look at how FDA cites people against CAPA, they're very specific and explicit in their observation. And look at how FDA objects to when they say your response is not adequate. When they say your response is not adequate, read that language carefully and understand that their expectation is really going deep into the root cause and taking preventive action, and not necessarily just checking the box. So I'm so glad that you bring this point. I've reviewed so many warning letters. I write case studies about them on Let's Talk Risk. And I find it, and I'm convinced that FDA's expectation and approach will not change. What might change is their ability to write you up more explicitly. And that is where the legal sort of jeopardy is, that you will find yourself in a lot more legal problem than before under QMSR. Am I reading it the right way, or am I sort of overreacting to it as?
No, that's the way I perceive it as well. Don't believe there will be any fundamental way that the FDA will change their approach, because I don't think there was anything wrong with their approach in the first place. And it's just, that's the thing, requirements, audits don't change, the requirements do. The nature of audits don't change. The one area I think will cause a lot of manufacturers difficulties, the FDA will now be able to cite on effectiveness of corrective action. And that, I think, will really cause a bit of a surge in certain elements, because if FDA see that, I know that FDA hate recurrence, because recurrence escapes, and escapes as they get larger. And I think that will be the main thing for me, is going to be F of 8.5.2 of 1345.
So let's talk about that a little bit more, because the way I see it, and of course my view and perspective is limited, so I'm open to conversation around that, is there's a very heavy emphasis in management reviews around timeliness and completion of CAPA, and not as much on again, I want to qualify that. There are pockets of excellence in our industry, but across the board, I feel like all our KPIs and dashboards, they care more about timeliness and completeness rather than effectiveness. And what I'm hearing you say is that now if FDA begins to focus more on effectiveness, it ties all the way back to the quality of your investigation, root cause investigation, your risk management, your approaches to preventive action, and very strong focus on effectiveness metrics. So I think I'm feeling that it might change a little bit the way we approach CAPA, more than just about doing the paperwork or compliance or harmonization of terminology, but the mindset is what I'm after. So Adam, first of all, do you agree with that feeling I have? Or, if so, how do you think manufacturers should prepare themselves for this conversation with FDA?
Yeah, no, I do agree. I do agree on the timeliness element. That's one thing I really like around on 13485. It does specify timeliness, because it is important when things, medical devices, time is everything. But effectiveness, I think, is the main topic change here that I think will really cause a bit of a shift in industry. I think it has to, because of the volume that's being conducted of FDA inspect. When they're doing FDA inspections, obviously resource is very limited. I think the QMSR is coming very deliberately. It's aligning with 13485 very intentionally as a result of each competent authority has limited resource. There has to be emphasis on patient safety and effectiveness and performance of the device ultimately. Timeliness of doing things in your QMS is important. I think effectiveness is really where they're starting to move, and that is in line with a lot of the competent authorities.
So let's talk about that a little bit more, because I want to really understand and clarify this. Effectiveness can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In my mind, effectiveness has to be in the context of the criteria that we define, right? And many times we struggle with that. especially the CAPAs that are open because of some higher frequency of complaints or some adverse events, what I call them reactive CAPAs. And we struggle to define the effectiveness criteria in terms of how are we going to measure? Are we going to say, hey, we have done this and the complaint rate has gone down, so our CAPA is effective? Or are we going to say that, hey, here are the root cause we found and we have fixed it with this level of reliability? So I personally struggle with that. And I think a lot of people struggle with defining the effectiveness criteria. Have you come across in your practice some examples that we can learn from how to define effectiveness criteria effectively?
Yeah.
No pun intended,
Yeah, understood. So I'd say the examples off the top of my head, I think one that really kind of comes to mind is around is I think in the timeliness of effectiveness. We're going to combine the worlds.
Yeah.
Would be on the one thing I learned very early on was that we should not be waiting until we have implemented a corrective action in order to define what an effectiveness verification is.
Yes.
And that is where I think a lot of that kind of, that's when you can define what you think is a success up front, and in that case. So I think a really good example that I suppose happened in the last few months with myself was a non-conformance raised. This was from a notified body, so this would have been under 13. Kind of a validation that was performed, a verification that was performed on test devices. Not enough samples basically used, so it was pinned against statistical sampling. With a very, very short, very small sample size. Our effectiveness criteria was essentially, we got to the, thinking about that, we're saying, how can we make sure this is not going to happen again when we start developing new devices, basically, when we get into this, because basically what happened is we submitted stuff to a notified body that they shouldn't have seen ultimately. With that, that's a lot of that is kind of saying, okay, there's a level of that containment that must be done when you initially look at something to understand what happened in the first place. So you don't need to get into corrective action to fix it and define your effectiveness. But, we kind of looked at it and done a bit of initial problem scoping and containment to say, well, we know that we had limited test data available and we had limited test rigs that we could use. So our effectiveness verification for this is we're going to put a little bit of a plan in place for a couple of months after this, and we're going to see for anything else if this kind of recurs across these other product lines and try to extend that data out across 4 other products that we were working on at the same time, because those are the only kind of other normative samples that we had to leverage at that time, So
wow.
Really challenging kind of example of it.
I like this.
Yeah,
I like this. Yeah. I think the way our systems are, maybe even paper-based systems or EQMS systems, they force us to think about CAPA as a linear sequential process. Fill this section first, then this section, then this section, then this section. And as a result, what you're saying makes sense. Like effectiveness comes at the end, like a checkbox, but it should be right in the front and along the way. You have to keep refining your effectiveness. So Adam, I know we can keep talking about these ideas and points forever. I have enjoyed this conversation a lot, but we are coming close to our 30 minutes. I want to give you a couple of moments to think about our discussion today and maybe boil it down to 2 or 3 key takeaway points we can share at the end. And in the meantime, guys, I want to share with you a couple of announcements. The first one that I'm particularly personally very excited about, and I've been working on this for the last 5-6 months, really going deep into finding the connection between history of adverse events and recalls. And I have utilized shamelessly ChatGPT for this purpose, which I think is a wonderful tool. If you know how to work with it and if you know how to spot the mistakes it makes, which it makes a lot of mistakes, if you know how to do that, it can give you a lot of power into understanding these insights. And I boiled this down into a 4-hour hands-on workshop. I call it the ChatGPT workshop, analyzing recalls and adverse events using ChatGPT. The first session we're going to have next week, and it is already sold out. So if you're interested in that workshop, please reach out to me. If you're interested in joining my waiting list, I'll put you on the waiting list. But it'll help you understand how to leverage the power of ChatGPT in the right way to go deeper. And hopefully it'll help you bring those methodologies, not necessarily the tools, but methods inside your post-market safety surveillance operations. The second announcement is many of you are used to attending these sessions week after week. We have operated on a weekly frequency for 2 years. We're going to go to a bi-weekly frequency every other week, not every week. And the reason for that, guys, is that I'm going to start focusing on my other video-based sit-down conversations. I do that with people, and it gives us a chance to go a little bit deeper into those points. And they're not live. They are recorded and they are published on the Let's Talk Risk newsletter later on. So we're going to alternate. We're going to alternate in the video format and the live audio format. But I remain open to your suggestions and feedback about what will make it worth your time to participate in these sessions. Please reach out to me anytime. With that, Adam, the floor is yours if you want to share a couple of key takeaway points today.
Okay, cool. So thank you, Naveen. So with that, I'd say that the main thing is I wouldn't be dragged into the idea that everything is changing under the QMSR, because it's certainly not. The FDA will still be the FDA. They still require their own registration. They will not accept ISO 13485 certificates. They will still want to do their own due diligence, of which they will, the foreign establishment inspections is not changing. With that, I also think there's a lot to be considered from a regulatory strategy perspective for manufacturers. Having clear delineation between certain routes to conformity assessment. So, do you have one separate route from the EU, from the UK to the US, because everyone's pushing towards reliance? But, Naveen, it would be wrong for me not to say the word risk with the word opportunity. With international reliance like this, we need to consider why the competent authority is doing this. The competent authorities make these types of decisions as a result of largely resource, and they want to become more focused, and that's what they're trying to do. So I would really caution manufacturers and be very deliberate and intentional on the changes that you make, and in that really consider the changes that will not be made as a result of QMSR. So specifically to verifications, validations, if on your 510K, don't get these mixed up as part of your same change control for the EU, for the UK, everywhere else. These would be the main changes that are the main kind of points I would caution people to.
Adam, what a delightful conversation we have. I have enjoyed it. I've really loved it. I love your energy. I love your perspective, and now I understand why you call yourself the other consultants. I love the way you think about problems, guys. Please reach out to Adam if you just want to chat and have a conversation. And part of the reason why we do these discussions so casually is to build these connections and networks. So nothing will give me more pleasure than finding that all of you are talking to each other and reaching out to each other, having these conversations beyond just these forums. So Adam, once again, thank you for taking the time. And guys, thank you again for joining. We'll see you again in about 2 weeks.
Thank you, Naveen. Pleasure.